In the dusty frontier town of Redemption Springs, everyone had forgotten about Martha. She was just the quiet widow who ran the boarding house, a woman whose kindness was mistaken for weakness, whose grief was mistaken for slowness. Folks saw her simple clothes and her tired eyes and dismissed her, casting her aside like a worn-out tool. They saw what was on the surface, but they never bothered to look deeper. But one man saw her differently. A rugged mountain man, a hermit named Ezra Cole, would ride into town once a month for supplies. He spoke little, kept to himself, and seemed as weathered and solitary as the peaks he called home. But from beneath the brim of his hat, he watched. He saw what no one else did. He saw a soul worth protecting. When danger came to town, a notice was nailed to her door, a debt that would steal everything she had. And then a threat even worse, a gang of ruthless men who wanted to take not just her home, but her dignity. That's when the quiet mountain man made a choice that stunned everyone. He risked his land, his supplies, his very life to keep her safe. What would make a man give up everything for a woman the world had cast aside? You're about to find out. Redemption Springs wasn't much to look at in the summer of 1882. The silver mine had dried up years ago, leaving behind nothing but empty pockets and hollow hope. Martha Hendris lived in a boarding house with peeling paint, and had for the 12 years since the mine took her husband Thomas. The townfolk called her soft, a woman who fed every drifter and mended clothes for free, never understanding that her generosity was a kind of strength they could never possess. She wore her late husband's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. It was tarnished now, the gold dulled by time, but it was a reminder that she had once been loved, once been valued, once been truly seen. What she didn't know was that someone was seeing her again. Ezra Cole lived alone in the mountains, a man haunted by a past he'd tried to outrun. He came to town only when he had to, a ghost moving through the streets. But he'd noticed Martha. He'd seen her 2 years back, stepping between a terrified Chinese railroad worker and a mob of cruel ranch hands. "He's under my roof," she'd said, her voice shaking but firm, "which makes him under my protection." Ezra had watched, stunned. Here was a woman the town had dismissed, defending someone even more powerless than herself, expecting nothing in return. From that day on, he paid attention. He saw the dismissive glances she endured, the cruel whispers she pretended not to hear. And he saw the quiet dignity with which she faced it all. It stirred something in him he thought had died long ago. On a late August morning, he watched her through the kitchen window, kneading bread as the sunlight caught the wedding ring on her neck. Just then, she looked up, and their eyes met. Ezra touched the brim of his hat. Martha smiled, a small, surprised smile, and nodded back. It was nothing, a brief exchange. But Ezra carried that smile with him all the way back up the mountain, a flicker of warmth in his solitary world. That evening, sitting on his porch, he made a quiet promise to himself. If Martha Hendris ever needed help, he would be there. He had no idea that promise was about to be tested. The notice appeared on her door the next Tuesday. A legal document nailed there by the banker's assistant. A small crowd gathered to watch, their faces a mixture of curiosity and cruel satisfaction. The words were cold and formal, but the meaning was a death sentence. Martha owed $340 in back taxes. She had 30 days to pay, or the property would be seized and sold at auction. $340. It might as well have been the moon. Martha stood on her porch, reading the notice with trembling hands. "I suppose this was inevitable," Mrs. Keene from the Mercantile said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can't run a business on charity." Martha carefully unpinned the notice, her fingers numb. She folded the paper, once, twice, as if making it smaller could shrink the problem. She went inside, closing the door softly behind her, and made it to her bedroom before her legs gave out. She sat on the edge of her bed, the paper clutched in her hand. The math was merciless. She had $4.60 in a coffee tin under her bed. The boarding house was all she had. Without it, she would be homeless, a beggar in a town that had already condemned her. She touched the ring on her neck. What would Thomas think? Would he be disappointed she'd failed? She didn't know. She only knew her boarders would need dinner soon. She couldn't let her crisis stop her from caring for them. She stood, smoothed her skirts, and went to the kitchen. Word spread through town like a disease. By evening, everyone knew. The saloon buzzed with talk of who might buy the property. No one talked about helping. The next morning, Martha swallowed her pride and went door to door. She offered to take in laundry, bake extra bread, clean houses. The answer was always no, sometimes polite, sometimes mocking. She went to the bank. Mr. Garrison, the president, listened with professional sympathy, which was no sympathy at all. "The taxes are 3 years in arrears, Mrs. Hendress," he said. "Business is business." She left the bank feeling smaller than she ever had. She walked to the cemetery and stood at Thomas's grave. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I tried. I really did." But what she didn't know was that someone had seen it all. Ezra Cole was in town that morning. He saw the notice nailed to her door. He saw her face go pale. He went to the saloon and listened to the vultures gloat. 300 for me 40, one man laughed. "She'll never raise that kind of money." Ezra's hand tightened on his glass. He wanted to tell them what they were, but he knew actions mattered more than words. That night, back in his cabin, he did something he hadn't done in years. He took inventory of everything he owned: his horse, his traps, his rifle, and his savings. For 15 years, he'd put aside gold and coins, a safety net for his old age. He poured it all onto his table. Gold dust in leather pouches, coins of all sizes, a few small nuggets. He counted it carefully. 362. 40. Enough, just enough. This was 15 years of hard, lonely work, his security, everything he had. He could pay her debt and have less than $25 to his name. It was foolish. He barely knew her. She would never even know who helped her. His life would go on, except he'd be broke, vulnerable to the first harsh winter or bad hunting season. But another part of him, a part that had been stirring to life every time he saw her kindness, remembered his promise. Ezra Cole had been many things in his life: a soldier, a killer, a coward. But he had never broken a promise to himself. He counted out exactly $340. Tomorrow he would ride to Redemption Springs and pay her debt. Anonymously. She would keep her home and her dignity. And somehow, that felt worth any price. For the first time in 15 years, he was about to do something that truly mattered. Ezra arrived in Redemption Springs as the sun was clearing the mountains. He tied his horse, Ruth, outside the bank and waited. The town slowly came to life around him, and people noticed. A man sitting outside a bank before it opened could only mean one thing: money. At precisely 8 o'clock, Mr. Garrison arrived, his keys jangling. "Mr. Cole," he said, surprised. "You're here early." "I have business with the bank," Ezra said, his voice even. Inside, the bank smelled of old paper and greed. Ezra placed the heavy leather pouch on the desk. "I'm here to settle a debt." Garrison's eyebrows rose. "Not mine," Ezra clarified. "Martha Hendress's debt." The banker's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. He didn't open the pouch yet. "Mrs. Hendress's property taxes, $340. You're here to pay it?" "That's right." "May I ask why? Does it matter?" Garrison leaned back. "It's unusual. Mrs. Hendress didn't mention having anyone who might help her." "The money's good," Ezra said flatly. That's all that should concern you." Garrison slowly counted the money, taking nearly 20 minutes. The only sounds were the clink of coins and the scratch of his pen. $340 exactly, he finally announced. "The debt is satisfied." "Good," Ezra said, turning to leave. "There is the matter of the receipt," Garrison said, his voice slick. "How should I note this payment? Shall I tell Mrs. Hendress you were her benefactor?" "No," Ezra's voice was firm. "She doesn't need to know it was me." Garrison's thin lips curved into a smirk. "You want this to be anonymous? I see. Privacy has a price, Mr. Cole. Extortion, plain and simple." Ezra felt his jaw tighten. "How much?" "Let's call it $5 for the additional paperwork and my discretion." Ezra reached into his pocket and pulled out 5 of his remaining dollars. They felt heavier than they should. "I'll record the payment as coming from an anonymous benefactor," Garrison said, sweeping the coins into his drawer. "You understand, of course, that she'll likely never know what you've done. There's no gratitude in anonymity." "Don't need any," Ezra said. As he reached the door, Garrison called out, "Mr. Cole, for what it's worth, I think what you've done is either remarkably noble or remarkably foolish." "Possibly both," Ezra said, and stepped out into the morning sun. He was about to mount his horse when a voice stopped him. "Ezra Cole." It was Tommy Sullivan, the young drifter who boarded at Martha's. "Mr. Cole," Tommy said, breathless, "I saw you come out of the bank. Did you just—" Ezra cut him off with a look. "I was conducting private business." But Tommy's eyes widened with understanding. "It was you. You paid her debt, didn't you?" Ezra stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "Listen to me, son. Whatever you think you saw, you keep it to yourself. Mrs. Hendress is not to know. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Tommy nodded slowly. "But why? Why wouldn't you want her to know?" "Because some things are better done quietly." Ezra mounted Ruth and turned toward the mountains, but as he rode past the boarding house, he glanced at the door. The eviction notice was still there. By afternoon, it would be gone. The thought brought a small, private satisfaction that warmed his chest. Back in Redemption Springs, the news spread like a wildfire. An anonymous benefactor had paid Martha's debt in full. By noon, the town was buzzing with speculation. Family from back east. A secret admirer. No one suspected the quiet mountain man. When the banker's assistant came to remove the notice, he found Martha inside. "Mrs. Hendress, your property taxes have been paid in full." Martha stared at him. "What?" "Someone came in this morning and settled the entire amount." "Who?" The word was a whisper. "I'm not at liberty to say. The benefactor wished to remain anonymous." Her legs felt unsteady. She gripped the doorframe. Someone had paid $340 to save her home. But who? And why? She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the receipt. The question spun in her mind. She had no family, no wealthy friends. Old Jacob came in for his tea. "You heard then?" "I heard," she said. "I just don't understand." "Maybe you don't need to," Jacob said gently. "Maybe you just need to accept it as a blessing. Someone out there sees you the way you deserve to be seen." The tears came then, great shaking sobs of relief and confusion. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were clear. "I'm going to find out who did this," she said. "I need to thank them." Over the next few days, she went door to door, trying to thank anyone who might have helped. Most people just laughed. "Why would I throw money away on you?" Mrs. Keene snapped. She briefly considered Ezra Cole, but the idea was absurd. A poor mountain man? Where would he get that kind of money? She dismissed the thought, never knowing her mysterious benefactor was back in his cabin, rationing his supplies, wondering if she would ever know the truth. 2 weeks later, Ezra rode down from the mountains, his supplies running dangerously low. He needed flour, salt, ammunition. His remaining money wouldn't go far. He was in the mercantile when Martha walked in. When she saw him, she paused. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice warm. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. As he gathered his meager supplies, Martha spoke again. "Mr. Cole, I wonder if I might ask you something." Ezra's heart skipped. Did she know? "You live up there alone," she said. "It must be a lonely life." "It suits me," he said. "I was wondering," she chose her words carefully, "if you would consider staying for a meal at the boarding house. There's always more than enough. No charge, of course." Ezra's first instinct was to say no. He wasn't comfortable around people. But she was looking at him with such genuine kindness in her eyes. "All right," he heard himself say. "I'd be obliged." "Wonderful," she smiled. "Dinner is at 6. He left the store in a daze. He had just agreed to have dinner, to sit at a table with strangers, to make conversation. The thought was terrifying and strangely appealing. The dinner at Martha's boarding house was a turning point. Over the next few weeks, something gentle and persistent grew between them. Martha found herself thinking about the quiet mountain man, wondering what drove him to such isolation. She asked old Jacob about him. "War does things to a man, Martha," Jacob explained. "Some come back and can't stop talking about it. Others come back and can't bear to talk about it at all. Ezra is the second kind. A soldier. That added a new piece to the puzzle." She began leaving small packages for him at the mercantile, a loaf of fresh bread, a jar of preserves. "He's just a mountain man," Mrs. Keene sniffed. "Probably doesn't even appreciate it." "That's not why I do it," Martha replied. Ezra didn't know how to reciprocate. He wasn't a man of social graces. But he tried. He left a bundle of perfectly split firewood on her porch one night. He dropped off fresh venison, claiming he had too much. He fixed her broken fence gate without being asked. Each gesture made Martha more certain of one thing. This man cared about her. But did he care enough to pay her debt? Before she could find out, new trouble arrived in Redemption Springs. Rumors began to circulate about a gang of rustlers led by a man named Jack Calhoun, a man with a reputation for violence. "They're not just rustlers," Sheriff Dalton warned the town council. "They're killers, and we have almost no way to defend ourselves if they decide to stop here." Fear spread through the town. Martha heard the stories but refused to run. "This is my home," she told her boarders. "I'm not abandoning it." That evening, as she sat with her late husband's Bible, she heard frantic hoofbeats outside. It was Ezra, riding harder than she'd ever seen. "Spotted riders coming this way from the north," he said, his voice urgent. "Heavily armed. I think it's Calhoun's gang." "When?" "Tomorrow, maybe the day after. Martha, you need to leave town. Tonight." "I'm not leaving," she said. "Old Jacob can barely walk. Lynn has nowhere to go. Tommy is just a boy. What happens to them if I run?" Ezra looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "Then I'm staying too," he said finally. "Ezra, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I'm not going back up that mountain knowing you're down here facing this alone." "Why?" she asked, her eyes stinging with tears. "Why would you do that?" "Because some things matter more than safety," he said, his voice low. "Some people matter more than common sense. And I'd rather face whatever's coming, standing beside you, than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have helped and didn't." They sat up late in the kitchen, drinking coffee. They talked about the gang, but also about their pasts. Ezra told her of his family's farm, of the war. "I couldn't stay there," he said. "Not after what I'd seen, what I'd done. So I came west, Figured I could outrun it." He smiled without humor. "Didn't work. You can't outrun what's inside you." "Maybe you're not supposed to outrun it," Martha said, taking his hand. "Maybe you're supposed to live with it and find a way to be something more." They sat in comfortable silence as dawn approached. What neither of them knew was that the gang was closer than they thought. Jack Calhoun and his men were already camped just miles outside of town, planning their descent. The gang arrived just as the afternoon sun began to dip. 5 men rode in first, spreading out along the main street, their hands resting on their guns. Then came Jack Calhoun. He was a big man with a scar that twisted his face and eyes as cold as winter ice. Violence clung to him like a shroud. The town went silent. Doors slammed shut. Windows were shuttered. Sheriff Dalton emerged from his office, his hand trembling. "I'm Sheriff Dalton," he began. "I'm going to have to ask you to move along." Calhoun just laughed. "Sheriff, we're just passing through. Need some supplies, a drink, and lodging." He pointed toward the boarding house. That place still taking guests. From her window, Martha watched with a growing dread. Ezra stood beside her, his body tense. "That's Calhoun," he whispered. "Wears his violence like a badge. Lock the doors. Don't let them in." But before she could move, there was a heavy knock. 2 of Calhoun's men were on her porch. "We hear you run a boarding house," one of them said, his voice mockingly polite. "We'd like some rooms." "I'm afraid I'm fully booked," Martha said, keeping the door open only a crack. "That's so?" the man sneered, peering past her. "Looks empty to me. Boss doesn't like being refused." The other man leaned against the rail. "Be a shame if something happened to this place. Old building like this probably catches fire real easy." Just then, Ezra appeared in the doorway behind Martha. His presence was unmistakable. "The lady said she's full up," he said calmly. "Best you respect that." The 2 men looked at Ezra with new interest. "Who are you, old man?" "Just a friend, and I'm suggesting you move along." The man laughed. "You suggesting? There's 5 of us and 1 of you." "I can count," Ezra said. "Doesn't change what I said." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife when Calhoun's voice broke the standoff. "What's the holdup, boys?" He walked up to the porch steps, studying Ezra. "This old woman says she's got no rooms," one of his men explained. "And her friend here thinks he can tell us what to do." Calhoun's cold eyes fixed on Ezra. "That right, friend? You think you can tell my boys what to do?" "I think," Ezra said carefully, "that the lady has the right to refuse service, and your boys should respect that." Calhoun smiled, a terrible expression. "Out here, rights are what men with guns say they are." He turned his gaze to Martha, his eyes crawling over her. "So, here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Hendricks. You're going to be charitable to me and my boys, and in exchange, we won't burn your little town to the ground." "You get off my property," Martha said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Calhoun's expression darkened. He took a step onto the porch, and Ezra moved to block him. "That's close enough," Ezra said quietly. Calhoun stopped, studying Ezra with new intensity. "You know what? I'm starting to think you're more than just some mountain hermit. There's something about the way you move. Military." Ezra didn't respond. "Well, let me tell you something, soldier boy," Calhoun snarled. "Whatever you were in the war doesn't mean spit out here. You keep standing in my way, you're going to find out just how quick I can end this." "Maybe," Ezra said, his voice dangerously low. "But not before I end you, and I think you're smart enough to know that's true." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. For a split second, something flickered in Calhoun's eyes. Recognition. He was facing someone just as dangerous as he was. "Well, well," Calhoun said, forcing a smile. "Tell you what, We'll give you and your lady friend a pass. For now. But Mrs. Hendress, he looked past Ezra. You and I aren't finished. He turned and walked away, his men following. Martha sagged against the doorframe, the adrenaline draining out of her. Inside, Ezra said gently, we need to figure out what we're going to do. That night the town held its breath. The saloon burned with light and the sound of rough laughter. At the boarding house, Ezra organized a watch. Martha brought him coffee as he sat by the window, his rifle across his knees. Ezra, she said, what you did today, you could have been killed. Could have, he replied. Didn't happen. But what if it had? He looked at her then, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. I spent 15 years up in those mountains, Martha, hiding from people, from connection, from anything that might matter enough to hurt. And today, when I saw those men threatening you, I realized something. What? That I'd rather die protecting something that matters than live another day protecting nothing at all. I matter to you. You matter to me, he confirmed quietly. More than is probably wise. She reached over and took his hand. You matter to me too, Ezra. They sat like that for a long while, and it was the most intimate moment she'd had since Thomas died. It filled her with both joy and terror. Ezra, she said softly, I need to ask you something. When my debt was paid, was that you? He went very still. Why do you think it was me? Because Tommy saw you at the bank. Because you're the only person who's ever looked at me like I'm worth something. Because, her voice caught, it's exactly the kind of thing you would do. Give away everything you have and expect nothing in return. He was silent for a long moment. I couldn't let you lose your home, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. And I couldn't tell you because what I did was selfish in a way. I did it because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. That's not selfish, Ezra. That's the most selfless thing anyone's ever done for me. It's not about the money. It's about being seen. She lifted his hand to her cheek. Thank you for everything. You've always mattered, Ezra said. The world was just too blind to see it. By the time dawn broke, they were no longer two lonely people. They were partners. The next day, Calhoun and his men emerged from the saloon, hungover and mean. They terrorized the town, taking supplies, emptying the bank, beating anyone who looked at them wrong. Then, that afternoon, Calhoun appeared on Martha's porch again. This time, he was alone. I've decided your boarding house would make a much better headquarters for me and my boys, he said through the crack in the chain door. You're going to invite us in, and if you don't... He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I'm going to start hurting people you care about. Old Jacob first, then the Chinese fellow, then that boy, Tommy. And I'll make sure you watch every minute. You've got until sundown. He walked away, whistling. Martha leaned against the door, shaking. Ezra appeared, his expression grim. He means it, Ezra. He'll do it. I know, Ezra said. He moved to the window, his hand resting on a brass compass he kept in his pocket. Which means we can't wait anymore. We have to act first. Act how? There's 7 of them. I fought longer odds before, Ezra said, and Martha saw the soldier he used to be in his eyes, cold and calculating. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let that man hurt you or anyone in this town. He began to explain his plan, and Martha realized with a mix of awe and terror that this quiet mountain man was a tactician, a strategist, a man who understood violence in ways she never could. As the sun began to set, she made her own decision. She wasn't going to hide while he fought her battles. She carefully set aside the wedding ring she wore around her neck. That chapter was closed. This was a new one. Tell me what you need me to do, she said, her voice steady and sure. We need to know more about you, Martha said gently. If we're going to trust our lives to your plan, we need to understand. Ezra nodded. He sat at the kitchen table, and the others, Tommy, Jacob, Lynn, gathered around. From his saddlebag, he pulled a faded photograph. It showed a much younger, clean-shaven man in a Union cavalry officer's uniform. His eyes held a dangerous intensity. That's you? Tommy breathed. Captain Ezra Cole, 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry, Ezra said, his voice flat. I enlisted in '61, fought at Gettysburg, Petersburg. After the war, I stayed on, fought out west for 3 more years. He recounted his last mission, tracking a band that had taken hostages. We got the hostages back, he said, his hands tightening on the table. But we killed 16 men. Warriors, old men, even a couple of boys no older than Tommy here. I was the one giving the orders. He told them about the last man he killed, a young warrior, no more than 17, trying to protect an old woman. I had him in my sights. Ezra's voice dropped to a whisper. He looked right at me, like he was asking me why. What gave me the right? What did you do? Lynn asked quietly. I took the shot. I always took the shot. That was my job. He pulled his hand away from Martha's, as if he didn't deserve her comfort. 3 days later, I resigned my commission. I couldn't pull that trigger one more time. So I rode west until I couldn't go any further, and told myself I'd never hurt another living soul unless I had no choice. Why are you telling us this now? Martha asked. Because if we're going to do this, you need to understand what you're asking of me. The man in that photograph, the soldier who gave those orders, he's still in here. If I do what I'm planning, I'll be letting him out again, and I don't know if I can put him back. What exactly are you planning? Calhoun expects us to flee or surrender, Ezra said, pulling out a rough map of the town. What he doesn't expect is an assault. He doesn't expect us to bring the fight to him. We hit them hard, fast, and cut their numbers before they can organize. You're talking about killing them, Lynn said, his voice shaking. I'm talking about defending this town. Ezra's eyes were hard. But yes, some of them will die. Martha looked at him, at the soldier he had been, and the man he was trying to be. I'm not hiding while you put yourself in danger, she said. This is my home, my people. I'm fighting beside you. Ezra looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. You ever fire a gun? My husband taught me. All right, he said, pulling a pistol from his belt. You'll cover me from the boarding house windows. They spent the last hour of daylight preparing. Ezra checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. Tommy and Lynn reinforced the doors and windows. Even old Jacob contributed. I was at Antietam, he said. Saw how soldiers positioned themselves. You'll want someone watching the north approach. As the sun dropped lower, Ezra stood by the window, watching the saloon. Martha came to stand beside him. Promise me something, she said. That you won't lose yourself in this. That soldier in the photograph, he's part of you, but he's not all of you. I promise, Ezra said, squeezing her hand. Then the sun touched the horizon. The time for talking was over. Across town, Jack Calhoun poured another whiskey, smiling. He was sure the old woman and her protector were packing their bags like cowards. He had no idea that a captain of the cavalry was about to bring the war to him. Just after sundown, Tommy found Sheriff Dalton's badge pinned to the front door with a crumpled note. Can't do this anymore. God forgive me. He ran, Tommy said, his hands shaking. The sheriff actually ran. Good, Ezra said quietly. How is that good? Because now we don't have to worry about him getting in the way. The lines are clear. He looked at Martha. Through the window, they could see the saloon blazing with light, could hear the gang's drunken laughter. They think they've won, Lynn said bitterly. That confidence will make them careless, Ezra replied. And carelessness kills. He moved to the table where his weapons lay. Martha watched him, and she saw the transformation. The gentle mountain man was gone, replaced by the cold, efficient cavalry captain. "Here's how this works," Ezra said, pointing to his map. 7 men total, 4 in the saloon, 2 on patrol, 1 lookout at the bank. The patrol just went by, which gives us 20 minutes. "What's the plan?" Martha asked. "First, we take out the lookout, quietly. That cuts their numbers and removes their early warning. Then, we force a confrontation at the saloon, on our terms." He looked at each of them. "Once we start, there's no going back. If anyone wants out, say so now." No one spoke. "We move in 15 minutes." Those 15 minutes stretched for an eternity. Martha made coffee, her hands needing a familiar task. Ezra stood by the window, a statue of patient readiness. She brought him a cup. "Ezra," she said quietly, "after this, if we both make it through, there's something I need to tell you." "Tell me now," he said, "in case there isn't an after." "I've spent 12 years being invisible," she began. "But you saw me. You looked at me like I mattered. And that changed everything. I know this is too fast, but life's short. I care about you, Ezra Cole, more than I probably should. And whatever happens, I want you to have that to hold on to." He put down his coffee cup and gently touched her cheek. "I came down from that mountain planning to pay your debt and disappear," he said. "But then you invited me to dinner. You looked at me like I was still human, still worth saving. I don't want to be alone anymore, Martha." "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that when this is over, I want to build something with you, if you'll have me." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." Just then, Ezra's pocket watch chimed. "Time to move." They slipped out the back door into the moonlit alleys. Ezra moved like a ghost, and Martha followed, her pistol clutched in her hands. The lookout at the bank was young, bored, smoking a cigarette. "Stay here," Ezra whispered. "I'm going to circle around behind him. Do what needs doing." Before she could respond, he melted into the shadows. Martha crouched behind a water barrel, her heart hammering. This was real. This was war. The lookout yawned and stretched. Then Ezra was there. A brief, silent struggle, a muffled gasp, and the young man slumped into Ezra's arms. A moment later, Ezra reappeared beside her. "Is he unconscious? He'll live. I tied him up in the alley." "I'm proud of you, Ezra," she whispered. "Don't be," he said, his voice tight. "Not yet." The patrol was due back any minute. They ran, sticking to the shadows, until they were across the street from the saloon. Through the swinging doors, they could see 4 men drinking, laughing, their rifles leaning against the bar. Unprepared. Sloppy. "This is it," Ezra whispered. "Wait for my signal." He took a deep breath, and the last of the mountain hermit vanished. In his place was Captain Cole, a man about to do what he did best. Ezra took the first shot. From the shadows of the alley, his rifle cracked once, and the window of the saloon exploded inward. A man inside cried out and fell. Chaos erupted. Before the remaining 3 men could grab their weapons, Ezra was moving. He kicked open the swinging doors and fired twice more with his pistol. 2 more men went down. The last one, the lean man who had threatened Martha on her porch, dove behind the bar, firing wildly. "Martha, now!" Ezra yelled. From her position in the mercantile doorway, Martha raised her pistol and fired at the bar, the sound deafening. The shots were inaccurate, but they served their purpose, forcing the lean man to keep his head down. "You're dead, old man!" the man screamed from behind the bar. "Not yet," Ezra said, and kicked over a table, using it for cover as he reloaded. Just then, the 2 men from the patrol came running down the street, drawn by the gunfire. Ezra, behind you! Martha screamed. She fired her pistol at the approaching men, forcing them to take cover behind a horse trough. Ezra knew he was caught in a crossfire. It was a classic military trap, and he had walked right into it. The man behind the bar popped up and fired, the bullet splintering the table next to Ezra's head. Then something unexpected happened. The doors to the houses and shops along the main street began to open. Men, and some women, emerged with whatever weapons they had. Old hunting rifles, shotguns, pistols. Led by Samuel the blacksmith, they began firing on the two gang members at the trough. The town had found its courage. The two men, surprised by the sudden resistance, were quickly overwhelmed. One surrendered, the other was shot and fell into the street. Now it was just Ezra and the man in the saloon, and Jack Calhoun, who had been upstairs. Calhoun appeared at the top of the saloon staircase, a shotgun in each hand. "You made a mistake coming here, soldier boy," he roared, and fired both barrels. The buckshot tore through the room, ripping apart tables and chairs. Ezra dove to the floor, the shots flying over his head. The lean man saw his chance. He rose from behind the bar, pistol leveled at Ezra. But he hadn't counted on Martha. She had moved closer, her fear replaced by a cold, protective rage. She fired one last time. The bullet caught the lean man in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped his gun. Now it was just Calhoun. He stood at the top of the stairs, reloading. Ezra knew he had only seconds. He rolled from behind the table, came up to one knee, and fired his rifle. The shot was perfect. It hit Calhoun in the leg, and the big man roared in pain, tumbling down the stairs to land in a heap at the bottom. The fight was over. The townspeople surged into the street, cheering. But Martha had celebrated too soon. As the crowd dispersed, a shout came from down the street. "Fire! The boarding house is on fire!" Martha's heart stopped. She spun to see orange flames licking at the back of her home, spreading rapidly across the dry roof. In the chaos, one of Calhoun's men, wounded but not out, had crawled away and set the blaze. "Tommy! Lynn! Jacob!" Martha screamed and ran toward the building. "Wait!" Ezra yelled, but she tore free. Those were her people, her responsibility. The front door was barred from the inside. She pounded on it frantically. Ezra arrived beside her. "Move!" He kicked the door once, twice. On the third strike, it burst inward. A wall of black smoke poured out. "Stay here," Ezra ordered. "Like hell I will." She coughed, and they plunged into the smoke together. The heat was intense. Her eyes watered, blurring her vision. "Tommy!" she cried. A muffled response came from upstairs. They stumbled toward the staircase, flames spreading across the ceiling above them. They found Tommy first, collapsed in the hallway. Ezra hoisted the young man over his shoulder. "Get him out," Martha yelled. "I'll find the others. I know this house better than you do." Ezra hesitated, then nodded and carried Tommy toward the stairs. Martha pushed deeper into the suffocating fog, feeling her way along the walls. She found Lynn in his room, trying to open a window that was swollen shut. She grabbed his arm and pulled him into the hall, but the smoke was disorienting. Which way was the stairs? Suddenly Ezra was there again, a ghost in the smoke. "This way." He guided them, his hand on Martha's shoulder, moving with a certainty born of chaos. They reached the stairs just as the ceiling collapsed behind them. A wave of heat seared Martha's back, but they kept moving, stumbling out into the cool night air. Tommy was conscious, coughing but alive. "Jacob!" Martha gasped, looking at the inferno. "Where's Jacob?" Tommy's eyes widened in horror. "He was in the parlor, keeping watch." Martha turned to run back in, but Ezra caught her. "No, I'll go." "You're hurt," she cried, seeing the blisters already forming on his arms. "You can barely stand. And you've got a burned back and smoke in your lungs," he said, his face grim. "I'm going. That's final." He turned and ran back into the burning house. The crowd held its breath. The building groaned, timbers cracking. Part of the front porch collapsed. "Ezra!" Martha screamed. "Get out!" And then 2 figures emerged from the smoke. Ezra, blackened by soot, supporting Jacob. They were barely 10 feet from the building when it gave way. With a deafening roar, the boarding house collapsed in on itself, sending a geyser of fire and ash into the sky. The blast of heat knocked everyone back. Through the chaos, Martha could see Ezra and Jacob on the ground. People rushed to pull them clear. The doctor came running. Martha fought through the crowd to reach him. Ezra was sitting up, coughing hard. Jacob lay beside him, breathing, but barely. "You idiot!" Martha sobbed, kneeling beside Ezra, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "You absolute idiot. You could have died." "Had to," Ezra coughed. "Couldn't leave him." "You couldn't leave him, so you nearly left me," she cried, all her fear and relief and love pouring out. "Don't you dare do that to me again." He reached up and touched her face. "I'm sorry, but I made a promise to protect people who matter." "That includes you," she said fiercely. "You matter, Ezra." Behind them, her home, everything she had worked for, was burning to the ground. 12 years of her life, gone. She should have been devastated. But instead, she felt a strange, profound relief. The house had been her link to the past, to Thomas. Watching it burn, she realized Thomas would have wanted her to live, not just exist. He would have wanted her to find new happiness. Sometimes, you have to let the past burn away to make room for the future. "It's just a building," she said quietly. Ezra looked at her, surprised. "What matters," she said, more firmly this time, "is the people. Everything else, we can rebuild." The townspeople, their faces filled with remorse and determination, were already organizing. "We'll help," Mrs. Keene said, her voice genuine for the first time. "We should have helped years ago. We'll make it right now." As dawn broke, the territorial marshal finally arrived. He surveyed the scene, the captured gang, the burned-out building, the armed townspeople, with surprised approval. "Looks like you folks handled things," he said. He recognized Ezra's name. "Captain Cole, heard about you. Good to see those skills put to use protecting innocents." He and his deputies took the prisoners away. As they loaded Calhoun into a wagon, the gang leader looked at Ezra with grudging respect. "You're better than I gave you credit for, old man. Could have killed me. Why didn't you?" "Because I've killed enough men in my life," Ezra said. "I'm done with being hard." In the ruins of her home, Martha found a few precious things: her Bible, miraculously safe, a few photographs, and still on its chain, Thomas's wedding ring. She held it one last time, then walked over to Jacob. "I want you to have this," she said. "Thomas would have liked you. Remember him for me." "Martha, I can't." "Please," she insisted. "I need to let it go. Make room for what comes next." Ezra appeared beside her. "What will you do now?" "Start over, I suppose." "Or," he said carefully, taking her hand, "you could consider something different. Come up the mountain with me, not to my cabin. But I have land. We could build something together. A real house, a way station for travelers. We could live on our own terms." Martha looked at the town that had finally come to see her worth. But starting fresh with Ezra, that was the future, not the past. "I want it," she said simply. "I want to build something with you." His face transformed with a smile. The town council, as an apology and a reward, granted Martha the deed to her land, free and clear, and gave them both $500 for protecting the town. "Accept it," Martha whispered to Ezra. "We'll need it to build our house." In the weeks that followed, Redemption Springs began to heal, and in the mountains, a new life began. 3 months later, Martha stood on the porch of the house she and Ezra had built. It was solid and warm, with a view of the valley below. Ezra came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. He looked healthier, younger. The weight of his isolation had lifted. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How 3 months ago I thought my life was over," she said. "Now I feel like it's just beginning." He pulled something from his pocket. A simple gold band, crafted with care. He had melted down his old military medals to make something new, transforming a symbol of his violent past into a symbol of their future. "I know we're too old for grand gestures," he began, "but I also know we can't afford to waste time. Martha Hendris, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy streamed down her face. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss full of promise. They were married the next week in the church in Redemption Springs, the whole town there to celebrate. They had been invisible to the world, but they had seen each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The story that began with a desperate debt had become a story of second chances, of courage, and of a love that arrived when they'd both stopped looking. They had found their own redemption, not in a town, but in each other. If this story touched you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what we have coming next is something you won't want to miss.